am experiencing something akin to post-nut clarity, but like in a research sense. Have you ever had that? Recently, me and Craig were redecorating our hallway, a epic journey of which we have chronicled on the channel, and it was quite the experience, an experience I don't want to have again. Frankly, I never want to redecorate a room ever again. However, because I am a positive panicker on this channel, I'm somebody who lives their life but also is very curious about the planet and what's going on with that. In the process of planning and executing our decorating experience, I fell into many pits of internet Googling and research, and I now know far more than I ever wanted to about the state of sustainable home decoration. And I frankly don't want this information in my head anymore. But before it leaves my brain, I thought I would leave it here on the internet, the dumping ground of all great rabbit holes, because I noticed there's not that much summary civilian information about it, and I wanted to let you know what I learned. So in this video, I am going to tell you what I found out, why your best intentions for sustainability can often be thwarted by systems, how I think you can mitigate some of the wasteful activities that are involved in home decoration, but also understand why it is so hard and maybe not give yourself such a hard time. I am, after all, famously a half-assed human, and I think it's much more effective to use any waning spare energy we have to direct it at the systems rather than individual blame. So while this video will focus mainly on what you can realistically do, I do have a section at the end where I have some suggestions for us collectively, because what can I say? I'm a dreamer. So I'm hoping you'll find this useful if you are decorating in the near or far future, if you just love a deep dive, or you're just interested in this idea of like thinking deeply about how things work and how they could potentially work better. So here's everything I've learned. A non-expert and civilian who will link their sources in the description, and it's just going to give you a generally rough overview of what I think you can do. The first section, paint. The most obvious thing you have to buy when you're decorating. And frankly, before I had ever decorated a room before, I imagined that was all you had to buy, but no. Sweet summer child, there is so much more. But let's start with the paint because it's the most obvious one. Even after all my research into types of paint and brands of paint and what the companies are doing, I do think the most important thing to think about when you are thinking about how can I buy paint sustainably is the volume in which you buy it. I will link a calculator below that you can type in like the dimensions of your rooms, and it will give you a rough estimate of how much you need in litres. But I must also stress that something that we tried to practice when we were buying, and I think is really sensible, is ignoring the economies of scale where you can. So for example, a 2.5 litre of paint might be a little bit cheaper per litre, but if you're not sure you're going to use all that paint, it's much better to buy the same amount of paint but in small quantities, maybe a litre or a half litre can each, so that you can return what you don't use to the shop. Because once that paint pot is open, it becomes very hard to dispose of, which we will cover later in the video. So that's the first thing. I think quantity and multiples that you buy in is the most important element of paint. However, if you do want to buy sustainable paint, you have to not only consider where you're buying your paint from, but also what type of paint you are buying. There are two mainstream types of paint that are available to civilians like you and me. One is oil-based paint, otherwise known as solvent-based or enamel, and then there is water-based paint, which is also called emulsion, and it's sometimes referred to as latex or acrylic paint. But essentially, the main component of that paint is water. That doesn't make it natural and it doesn't make it non-toxic, but it does help. The main basis of the oil-based paint is oil, making it much harder to get out of clothes and much harder for you to clean and rectify brushes for future use. You will also note that it is not only toxic to the environment, fun, but also toxic to humans, as you will have seen if you've chronicled my accidental use of solvent paint in our vlog. Quoting now from a source about oil paint, or I think more accurately, I call it solvent paint because that's like the most dangerous part of it, right? Or like oil feels a little bit more like, oh, it's just oil. Anyway, when these paints are poured onto the ground or start to leak from a landfill, they don't just vanish. The toxic chemicals can seep deep into the soil, a process known as leaching. They can end up poisoning the very groundwater we rely on on for drinking and farming. A single drop of oil can pollute a massive amount of fresh water, and the same principle applies here. The solvent in oil-based paints can create a toxic plume underground, spreading slowly and damaging entire ecosystems from the ground up. So it's not like just dropping a crisp packet and being like, well, that's probably going to be here in 80 years. It's like a little bit more spiraling wave of effects that can plume out of control. So I ideally don't want to use them. However, we did actually accidentally use some. Mount that on top of the fact that it's not very good for you to inhale. It's not like disastrous if you're just doing it once, like don't panic too much, but it's not very good for you to inhale. It's not really, I would say, the paint of choice. Why do people use it, you ask? Well, it goes a lot further. You really need way less paint, and also apparently it lasts longer, although it is also like prone to discoloration over time more than water-based paint. So like, is it worth it? I don't know. But that's from my findings what oil-based paint holds. The other thing about oil-based paint is it takes about 24 to 48 hours sometimes to dry, whereas water-based paint only takes between 2 and 4 hours normally. So you can actually get the job done much faster, and it's much more pleasant to be around while you're doing it. You want to, particularly if you're buying water-based paint, look for low VOC paint so that it's extra non-toxic, although it's still inherently toxic in some way. We'll get to it. In general, water-based paint is much more like the paint that you might have painted with at school, and it's just much less of a wild card when it comes to dealing with it as just like a normal person. So it's important to look for what kind of paint you're buying, not only in your main colour paint, but also in your wood and door paint and your metal paint for radiators and your primer, which was where we went wrong. I didn't think that there were 2 types of primer as well as the paint. Anyway, after much Googling and spending a lot of time on lots of different company websites, I picked out 3 companies that I thought were worth trusting with my money to vaguely be sustainable. Not perfect, but vaguely sustainable. The 3 things that I was looking for as a base level were them being water-based, low VOC, made in the UK so that they haven't travelled that far. Again, that'll be different for you if you live in a different country. And vegan and cruelty-free. The first brand is Farrow & Ball, known as being incredibly fancy in the UK, although a very similar price point to the other 2 brands I'm going to mention, but just has like a reputation for being very bougie. They fulfill all of my criteria, apart from they aren't 100% vegan. They're 100% cruelty-free. The distemper brands of their paint aren't vegan, but the paint that I bought or would have bought was. So that is something that I can live with, but just so you know, that's what's going on. Other special elements of Farrow & Ball, they are B Corp certified, which is a hard certificate to get, and like a general certificate of like, we are trying our best with the environment and ethical stuff. They make all their paint in small batches. They have a completely renewable energy factory. Even their forklift trucks are all electric. Like if you go on their website, there's a lot of detail there. Like honestly, I don't think anybody's reading that, but apart from me, apparently. But I appreciate it, and it is actually quite a thorough look at their factories. They used to be owned by private equity, boo, but they are now actually owned by a Danish group called Hempel, which is a global supplier of paint. They're just like experts in paint, and they have a foundation focused on sustainability. So that is something. It's not nothing. The second brand, and one that I think is really interesting, is Lick. They started in 2020, accidentally during the pandemic, but like what a time to go into home renovation business. So they're less well established, but that doesn't mean that they're not sustainable. They are low VOC, they're made in the UK. They are vegan, but I cannot find any evidence that they are cruelty free, but I don't understand why they wouldn't be. But then also if they were, why wouldn't they boast about it? Confused Lick, let me know. They're water based, they're B Corp certified. They are funded through investment, but they're still considered a startup. Something that is interesting is that they make their samples like this rather than in a pot or a tin, which obviously completely saves on waste and transport and is like a really clever element. And I tried it and it does come off your walls very easily if you stick it on. However, as I voiced in the other video, aren't sure how representative this is of what it will actually look like on your walls if you're not painting on plain white. So if you have ever used Lick, and you can let me know in the comments below, but obviously I didn't end up using this one, so I don't know, but that is the only problem I can think of. And again, like it's cool because you can stick it in loads of different places in your room. So like if you're not sure how it's going to look in the shadows versus near a window, it makes a lot of sense. I just have some questions about how accurate the colour is. And also, I am pissed that they only call their colours things like Green 6. I want colours like Moon Shadow Sundown, Frog Spawn Parade, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle's Sweater. I want the whimsy. I don't like that. But apart from that, Licked, very good. And the final thing about Licked is that they also, unlike the other brands I've mentioned, make sustainable tools like biodegradable paint trays, which we'll get into in the end, and more sustainably made bamboo-based paint brushes, recycled plastic floor covers, all that sort of thing. So I do like the fact that they've also filled a gap in that market as well, and you can access some of that stuff at B&Q, and it's literally the only sustainable section of B&Q in the whole thing. So I respect them for bringing that to B&Q. Because my God, B&Q do not care about sustainability. That's a whole other thing. But like, I was impressed by that as well. And then finally, the brand that we ended up going with, simply because we liked the colour the most, and we have actually used this paint brand before. Here's a sustainability tip. If one of your friends is decorating their house and you compliment the colour, they might say, hey, I've got some extra paint, do you want to borrow it? And then you can like take that pot of paint to your house, paint your wall and give it back to them. That's what we did when we painted our feature wall in our bedroom. Thank you, Rosianna, for the colour Mischief from Little Green. Little Green are a completely independent, family-owned business based in Manchester, so we're supporting the northern economy as well. They're founded in 1996 by a guy who just like really cares about paint and is an expert in it and has like a background in painting and coating and is just really geeky about it. No surprise then that we find out they also support the National Trust and are doing lots and lots with them on a permanent basis, not just like just as a project for Easter kind of vibe, like they're just like ongoing work and support and donations to the National Trust, working with them to preserve the colours in National Trust houses and also using some of the colours from National Trust houses as inspiration for their paint, which I think is really cool. They also have a remix range from upcycled paint. Sadly, they didn't have any shades that we wanted to use, but that is there and that's something that I would definitely consider in the future going back to. Also, we were able to get ours mixed. There are lots of like local shops that do it and you just go in and they have loads of white paint that is Little Green branded and then they just put in presumably a smaller, stronger pigment and mix it for you. So again, I think that also for me prevents waste. Like if somebody turns up and they don't want that colour, they haven't shipped tons and tons of it all over the country. They've just been shipping the pigment. I don't know if the other brands do that because I didn't use them, so I don't know, but I would say that that was cool. If you work for one of the brands I just talked about and you think I got it wrong or I missed something really vital about the sustainability of your brand, I cannot emphasize to you how much that is your fault because I trawled through your websites. It's actually kind of hard to find, even when you're doing it right. Please make it obvious. Anyway, also one fact before we move on to the next section, because you better believe I promised you a deep dive and you're getting one. Did you know why paint isn't vegan sometimes? Because I think that's weird. Ingredients that make paint not vegan. Some include derivatives from female lac. What's a female lac when it's about? I don't even know what that is. Oh, it's like a bug. Oh, look at them. They're so happy. They could also contain bits of beetles. Sure. Oxgal, which is like from the stomach of oxes, gross. Paint and pigments can include animal bone or animal bone derivatives. Some paints even contain milk, which is used as a binder to stick the pigments to the base paint. Now, as I can see, lots of paints can be used without that. So genuinely, what's the point? What is the bloody, in this day and age, what's the point? I'm not saying, oh, that is the worst thing that you've ever done. I can't believe you manufacture it. But I'm also just like, what? Why? Why? Anyway, the adults are just simply not in charge. Section 2. Yes, we're only on section 2. If you need to take a toilet break or a tea break, now's your time. Section 2 is tools. First, I want to talk about paintbrushes. Again, one of the most obvious things when you think, I'm going to paint something, and rollers as well. The thing with paintbrushes is while you can buy sustainable ones, like the Lick ones, we did buy some of those, unlike makeup brushes or art brushes or any other kind of brushes that you might use in your normal life, decorating paintbrushes are really hard to salvage after you've used them, especially if you are using oil-based paint. If you're using oil-based paint, really the only way to clean them is with white spirit. White spirit, when we talked about how bad oil paint is for the environment and for you and it's incredibly dangerous, white spirit is like 10 times worse. It's really bad. There is literally no way to dispose of it. We're going to talk about all the ways you can dispose of other kinds of paint later in the video, but there's no way to dispose of it. You have to just use it up. But They only sell it in really big quantities, even though you often only need a tiny little bit. And it's really flammable and incredibly dangerous to have around the house if you have like kids, even kids visiting. Water-based paints you can wash with water. However, as we'll get into later in the video, if you wash them in water, that water then becomes hazardous waste. Like, you can't just pour it down the sink or onto your lawn, and then you still have to dispose of the water in the very complicated way you have to dispose of the paint. So that's to be aware of. And also the fact, I don't know if you've ever tried to wash a paintbrush, especially one that you've been smushing into a wall for like 2 or 3 days. It's very hard to get the paint out of the core of the brush, like where it's stuck to the handle, and once you use that again, that paint is probably going to come out once it's wet again by a new paint. So if you're not using the same paint color, you really run the risk of fucking up your whole job by switching out the brushes in different colors. You get the idea. So I don't think at the moment there is a very good solution to washing and reusing paintbrushes, although we try to. But something that is good to keep in mind is that if you're doing paint jobs between 2 days, they will dry out. So putting them in a sealed container or wrapping them in, I keep wanting to say the American word, cellophane, cling film, wrapping it in that so that you can use it over the whole of your project and it doesn't dry out is good. However, at the end of the project, I remain skeptical about how realistic it is to keep, wash and reuse your brushes safely. So that's very annoying, and I would like it to be different. However, if you are going to chuck away a brush, it's much better to chuck away a biodegradable brush or one that has been made of better materials. So as I said, Lick do sell more sustainably made and slightly more biodegradable brushes, however imperfect, and they do shed less than the other brushes that we were using, which is really annoying when you're painting with a brush and then it starts shedding bristles and you actually start painting the bristles into your walls. Hate that. So yes, I remain skeptical and wish there was some consumer improvement in how to reuse paintbrushes and rollers. I honestly don't think there's a perfect way, but those are some ways that you can mitigate some of the problems with it. Roller handles, on the other hand, like you put your roller head on a handle, those are very easy to reuse, and we've had ours for years, and that's great. That's easy. So at least I'm thankful for that, if nothing else. Sanding. You probably will have to sand as part of your paint job. In fact, that became at least a third of the job when we were doing the hallway. It took us 2 days to sand everything we needed to sand down, and we used, I think, like 16 sheets of sandpaper. When we were thinking about decorating, I did look briefly and couldn't find any kind of sustainable solution to using sandpaper. I don't honestly know how bad it is, but I wanted to find the best solution possible. I couldn't find anything. However, I did recheck myself this morning, and I did find one company that makes sandpaper that has some element of recycled cotton in it. So that's something. A hill that I will die on, though, is that they try and sell you sanding blocks next to the sandpaper in any DIY shop, and that's annoying because sanding blocks is just like a massive block of cork that you're supposed to wrap your sandpaper around, and I'm like, you have solid objects in your house. We used old boxes that I used to have my business cards in that are like plastic and like quite durable, but you could also use, like, this is my microphone case. You could use that. You could use a book that you have hanging around. I think that's a silly thing to sell. I think it's a waste of money. Just find something hard that you've got around your house, wrap your sandpaper around it, Bob's your uncle, Fanny is your aunt. I also wanted to mention in the last video where we were vlogging, that hasn't gone up yet, but I'm imagining some people will have something to say about the fact that we weren't wearing masks when we were sanding. In our defense, we did wear masks for a little bit, and the masks are very reusable. We've had those masks for a long time, but they were like, we were working in a really closed area and we were both very stressed. So in the end, we made the executive and maybe misinformed decision to take our masks off. But because we were sanding very slowly and very small amounts of paint was coming off, I essentially just kept a small hoover with us at all times. And like, as we sanded, I was like constantly hoovering around the sand so it wasn't getting into the atmosphere. However, that is not medical or official advice, and do as I say, not as I do. You should totally wear a mask when you sand. We just didn't. And if you're using an electric sander or something like that, then you really do need to use a mask as well. So maybe that's a motivation to do it by hand, because then the dust is getting into the air at a much more manageable rate where you can like hoover as you go. But that's just what we did. And I have said it, and I'll say it before and I'll say it again, I'm not perfect. Reuse your masks though if you do use them. Paint trays. Look, you have to use them to roll out your paint and to switch off your paintbrushes. They're very annoying because in my head, like last time we used them, we didn't protect our paint trays and I regretted that. So this time I'd seen some advice on the internet about putting cling film on your paint trays so that you could like just take the cling film off afterwards and reuse them. However, we did that, didn't fucking work at all, did it? The internet lied to me again. It was just constantly moving around, like really bad. Like I could gaffer tape the stuff down and it would either tear or move around so much that it just made me get like at least as much on the paint trays, if not more. So that is not a hack. However, halfway through the job, we did start using licked trays, which are biodegradable and made out of like a kind of cardboard thing, which I was hopeful about. However, I realised that as we kept using them, they were like quite absorbent. So throughout the day, they just became saggier and saggier and harder to work with. If you think about your roller, you want your roller to be going over a flat surface, preferably with ridges on it, so you're really squishing the paint out of the roller and you're making sure you're only getting a very thin amount on the roller. This thing sagged like that, and especially the small one didn't really have that many ridges at all. So it became very inefficient towards the end of our painting day, and those trays didn't even last us a day. So it was a nice gesture. I'm glad that we researched it, but I just want you to know, if you're doing a big job, I don't think those things are the way to go. But if you're just doing like a touch-up job or something that's going to last like half a day or just like one door, probably fine. I am confident that the problem of paint trays is a solvable one by humanity, just not by me. I don't know how to solve that, but I do want to flag that I think it is unsolved. The third section is just called the waste of ruining everything. These are all the unexpected things that you might have to throw away or like you might ruin in the process of painting. And I think that is also a very big contributor to the waste that happens when you're decorating your home. So I wanted to list some of the things that we almost ruined or did ruin and how I would advise preventing those things from happening. So the first thing is the drop cloths. We did use old duvets and duvet covers and pillowcases. However, in some spots where some of us, me, were particularly messy, that did seep through to the carpet, and we did end up going out and buying a lick recycled plastic drop cloth that worked really, really well and really effectively and was massive, and we even like had to cut it in two and we still had loads. So while on the surface it might look like fabric is better to put down, if you want to protect your carpets, which I think is like a much more of a horrible sustainable issue, if you need to replace a carpet, that's much more wasteful than putting like one very thin piece of plastic in the bin, then I personally will use the lick plastic drop sheets again instead, because I think it's more wasteful for you to ruin your carpet and have to replace it. But both things are valid, and it depends on if you already have old bed sheets around or if you don't, or if you're like actually really skilled at painting and not a klutz like me and probably aren't going to get that much on the carpet. You make your decision. I've made mine. Another thing that was really annoying that I hadn't thought of was that you have to put a drop mat down for all the range of a door, because you're probably going to need to use the doors during the painting process. So I'd put a drop cloth by the bottom of the door while I was painting it while it was shut, and then didn't think and opened the freaking door. And then the paint went all over the carpet on the other side of the door. So do that, because that's another strategy for not ruining your carpets. Craig had the very clever idea of putting our paint pots that we were using in a washing up bowl, which meant they were way harder to knock over. And if they did knock over, they'd just go in the washing up bowl and not on the floor. I thought that was big brain energy, and we should all do that. That was great. He also put X's on the floor, like just X's using coloured tape, so that it just reminded us when we weren't painting or working on the house that that door was wet. So it was just like a kind of signal to our brains to not lean against the door or touch the door as we were opening it. So clever. Definitely avoided a lot of tears. I'm also annoyed that I didn't frog tape the door handles properly. I just frog taped around the door handle so the paint wouldn't get on the door handle. But actually, because you're wandering around with a shit ton of paint on your hands all the time, your automatic brain will default to touching the whole of the door handle. So I wish I would have frog taped the whole door handles, like even the little bits at the end, because then we had to sit there and get loads of paint off the door handles, and that was annoying. Hoover before you paint, because if you're somebody that sheds hair, like a maniac like me, or you just have like a dot of dust in your house residual, it's really annoying constantly accidentally painting dust or hairs into your paint and having to redo it. Don't do it. Even in those tiny skirting board crevices and places like that hair never gets, it's there, trust me. It is like living with a molting dog living with me. So definitely do that. I had special socks that I wore while I was standing on the drop mats, and whenever I walked off the drop mats and into the rest of the house, I'd take those socks off. I think that was much more effective than getting paint on my actual feet and then having to wear socks around the house and forgetting and the paint seeping through the socks or whatever. Have a special pair of socks that you probably will have to throw away after this experience that is just for when you're standing on the drop mats. Consider the clothes that you wear. Again, there's probably a lot of people all over the country throwing away clothes into landfill every day because they have ruined them from decorating jobs. And to be honest, I get it. Water-based paint is probably easier to get out. I got a lot of oil-based paint on my clothes and I'm not happy about it. It doesn't come out in the wash, doesn't really come out at all. However, I do mean to keep those clothes and use them around the garden and stuff, so it's fine. I have my designated sad pair of dungarees with my big crotch rip in them, and I've just resigned myself to my fate. But so we didn't throw away any clothes in the process, but it's just something to consider. You can't necessarily save those clothes, so are they things that will probably, like, that you would have thrown away eventually anyway, or like, I don't know, mitigate that as you will, but there probably will be some clothes waste in this process as well, so be aware of that. I would pick something that is already on the way out in some way. Now, the final section. What happens when you've finished your beautiful decorating project? It's all over, right? You can celebrate. No. Now you have to get rid of all the weird shit you had to buy to make the walls look nice. Obviously, the best and most economical option is that you keep some of the paint around, either for touch-ups if you have any left, or if you think you will use that paint again in another space, especially if it's like a neutral colour like white or something, probably worth keeping at least for a couple of years. As you saw in our video, we reused some paint that we'd had for a couple of years and it was totally fine. It looked a bit weird when we opened it. It did look like the devil's soup on first glance, but after a little stir with a chopstick, it was totally fine. Just make sure you're sealing it properly, airtight, and also keeping it in a cool, dry, dark space. If you have a can of paint that is more than half full, there is a scheme called Community Repaint where you can drop off paint and other people in your community can come and pick it up for free. I didn't know about that. I think that's really cool. So I'll leave the links below to that. But if you do have to throw away the paint, if there's no way of salvaging it, it's gone. It's over. You're probably never going to use it again, but you do have quite a bit left. How do I say this? Did you know that throwing decorating household paint away in your bin, in your normal bin, is an offence? Not only a civil offence, it's a criminal offence. And I was so shocked about that I actually asked the man who we went to the dump and I was like, just to check, is this genuinely a criminal offence if you put this in your actual bin? He was like, yeah. I looked up the fines online and the highest I could see was like £5,000, like down to like £500, like that kind of range, I guess, depending on how much paint you throw away. But just so you know, I didn't. And that also includes water that you have washed the paint in. This is, from my sources, the same. And I asked the waste disposal executive at our local dump and he said the same. It's the same for water-based and oil paint. It's illegal whatever happens. And if you wash paint in water, that water then becomes like exactly like the paint and you have to treat it like the paint. It's contaminated like the paint. You can bring it to your local tip. However, not all tips do paint. Some of them don't take paint. That's annoying. Why is that a thing? Also, when you turn up to the tip, which we did, with wet paint sealed in tins, and we thought we were doing the right thing. We were like, here we are. We're in the right place, doing the right thing. What great citizens we are. No, you can't give wet paint to a tip in the UK. They don't take it, or they do take it on one designated day every couple of weeks when the solvent man comes. that's what, his words, not mine. When the solvent man comes, that's when you can bring any kind of wet paint to the tip and they can dispose of it. But it's not something you can do every day. And if you don't come on the designated mysterious day when the solvent man is there, you have to dry it out at home. And that can potentially take, I'm not kidding you, according to the leaflets that the tip gave me, months. And you can't just dry it out in the air either. You have to put like soil or sawdust in it or some kind of paint hardener and then leave it with the lid off to dry. Now, if I just told you what I told you about how dangerous solvent paint is, you don't want to be doing that in your home. So you'd have to be somebody who has an outbuilding or a shed or something if you're using oil-based paint, or even if you're in your home, like we are drying ours out in our conservatory, very lucky to have a conservatory. Even that isn't very ideal and like wouldn't be good if we had kids or pets or anything, and would be completely impossible if we lived in a flat. Is it realistic to expect a normal citizen to keep some open paint pots in their house for weeks or potentially months for it to dry out before they can legally dispose of it? I don't think so. And also, like the tip is usually only open during the day. I have a very flexible work schedule, as does Craig. Most people will only be able to visit the tip at the weekend, and that is not the designated day that the solvent man comes. I want you to do this hand action every time you say the word solvent man. The solvent man comes. He gave me a sleep alert. I was like, I can do this. It's very annoying, but I can totally do it, and I'm willing to do it because I don't want to break the freaking law. Like, what a boring reason to go to prison. But I was just thinking like how undoable this is for most people, and it made me want to tear my hair out a little bit. But don't break the law, do it. But I'm also just on a broader sense being like, what? This doesn't seem like a topic that I can just sit in my bedroom and like stare into the distance and come up with a solution for. But that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be a solution, because I was looking at the tip man like, are you sure? And he was just like, I'm sure. Like, he knew that he was breaking ridiculous information to me as well. And it was just like, which is the perfect segue. We come to our final section of this deep dive video. Broader solutions. What do we do about it? And you better believe, because we were decorating for 9 days straight, I had a lot of time to think about this. As I said, I'm not an expert, but I do think that there might be some solutions to this. And here are the ones that I came up with in my silly little brain as I was daydreaming while sanding down trim within an inch of my life. Before I deliver my solutions though, I want to just give you something open wide. This is the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. Are you ready? It's not your fault. This is really hard to navigate as a normal person, and totally something that we collectively should be investing more research and time into, because it's the whole process of decorating whilst knowing that the planet is on fire and you should probably not be being wasteful is just designed for you to fail. And even if you fix what you're doing, which I really encourage you to do, and I think it is a really good thing to do, I'm not saying it's not, but the scale of the problem is absolutely wild. It's an estimated 34 million litres of decorative paint go to waste every single year. That's just in the UK, which works out about 10% of everything that is sold. 98% of leftover paint is either dumped in landfill or washed down the drain. So a lot of people are breaking the law here. And it's not just individuals. In fact, I didn't know this, Dulux, while they do fund some repaint schemes and stuff like that, have a whole rigmarole of allegedly breaking the law and dumping loads of their own factory waste and paint into our water systems. I'll leave the links below because we don't want to be libelous, but I'm just saying allegedly it's looking really bad for Dulux, and they're like the biggest paint people in the UK, and they still do stuff like that. A lot of their paint is water-based. They still sell a lot of oil-based, but they do sell water-based paint. They are all of their paint is made in the UK. Like, they do some stuff, but 98% of leftover paint is either in landfill or washed down the drain. That can't all be us. I know that individuals are probably breaking the law all the time, but I think that the companies are breaking the law too. I think that's where the 98% comes from. This is also a massive issue because the UK government is obsessed with building new housing, even though there are 1.2 vacant dwellings in the UK. I don't think people talk about that enough. 1.2 million vacant dwellings, the private sector making up most of that. So basically people who have bought flats and won't rent them out because they're just trying to accrue wealth on them. And like this, it's a whole thing in London. You can look it up. They've bought flats. They're either unlivable to live in because nobody's looked after them, or they're just keeping them and sitting on them and being frankly dicks about it. But the UK, they want to build, just in England alone, they want to build 1.5 million new homes by the end of this decade. And I remind you of that other figure, 1.2 vacant homes. Just saying. Anyway, 1.5 million homes, new homes in the UK, right? All of those are going to be decorated at least twice. Once by the developers, so people can look around the house and go, oh, what a nice white house. And then again, when the first people that own the houses move in, they will decorate. Home ownership aside, of the houses that are rented, every time that I've moved into a new rental property, they have repainted the whole thing. Not very well and not very efficiently. And painting over even things like light switches. It's the things that I have seen. However, I have no data, but I will bet you through anecdotal received ancient wisdom alone that none of those, or very few of those landlords, will be thinking about any of the things we've been talking about in this video. Like, they won't care. They won't be considering it. They will not be doing it. And as 36% of households in England are rented, and people are moving very, very frequently if they're in rented property, anecdotally, because the rent keeps going up and the state of the rental properties are dangerous and bad, and people keep moving because of damp. The average person in London moves every every 2.5 years. So every time that somebody is leaving a property, they're probably getting one of these awful like landlord special jobs in between. And then in the UK, it's more like 3 to 5 years in general, but like in London, it's every 2.5 years. So what are the things that we should be doing? One, I think we should be making better products. I think we should be rewarding companies that make better products. And I think we should be paid enough to be able to afford to buy those products. As I said, for our main colour, we bought little green paint. However, it was like quite financially prohibitive and it was not within the budget that we had to be able to afford to do the whole way. It wasn't possible for us to buy all of our paint from Little Green. And I imagine for most people that will have been the same. If we all earned more, we'd be able to buy the paint that doesn't kill us. A radical thought is just, we're not calling it socialism. We're not calling it wealth distribution. I'm just calling it sharing. Logical. I think that we should be outlawing solvent paint to a regular person. Like maybe on an industrial scale, you need to use it for some weird reason. Tell me in the comments below, experts. But I don't think normal people should be having to use or buy or not know about the dangers of solvent paint. I don't think we should be selling it to the normal customer because it's really hard to use and it's incredibly hard to dispose of effectively. I think there should be more regulations on people who make paint in general. There is a company that I found after I researched all my research for the brands that I just talked about at the beginning of the video and after we picked all our paint for our whole way. There is a brand I found called Little Knights who are claiming that you can actually wash their paint down the drain, and I couldn't work out what the scientific reason for that was. It was very like fuzzy on the website, but that could be a really legit bit of science. They just haven't put it on the website because I guess they just don't think people like me will be able to understand it, and maybe they're right, but I'd like the opportunity to try. So there is one company I found that ticks all of the other boxes as well. Doesn't have a very nice green, so I wouldn't have picked them anyway. But in theory, it could be possible, and one company claims to be doing it. Why the other companies aren't doing it, I will never know. 2, make disposal easier. Only 1 in 3 household waste recycling centres, or TIPs, you want to call them, in the UK accept liquid paint, with only 2% of overall decorative paint being reused or manufactured. Why aren't, just like Lush are, why aren't individual paint companies responsible for their tins? Why aren't they the people that have to accept the tins back? It would be much more efficient. Doing it on scale would be much easier for everybody, and then you'd get an opportunity for the customer to come back into your shop. Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't that a good thing that they'd have to return? Surely that's what, like, Lush has their own recycling centre because they're the people that know best how to recycle their own products. But obviously there is also like a good, like, consumer element to it where you're getting people to come back into your shop with their empty products and talk about them with your staff. Like, surely you want that. Anyway, I'm not a retail expert. I don't know what I'm talking about. It just sounds logical to me. There is actually, I found out, a pioneering thing going on in the Midlands right now. They're trialing it out, called Paint Care, where you will be able to return some kinds of paint to B&Q and the Dulux centres if you've bought Dulux. Oh, and one brewer's decoration centre in Sutton Coldfield. So that is a regional trial that's going on at the moment that I just found out about. Maybe me and Craig can find somewhere to try all that out and see if a B&Q will take our paint back. Very exciting. However, maybe just regionally it'd be great if there was like a drop-off curbside pickup for paint, just like there is with electrical goods. With our council, you can just like put your electrical goods on the side, not in your bins, but like put it in a plastic bag and label it and they will come and take it away. And also just generally, like, why doesn't it say on my paint tin, like what, like with cigarettes, a lot of the paint that I saw did have health warnings on it and like don't go near it, don't inhale it, all that kind of thing, or don't get on your clothes. But nobody is telling you on the packet very clearly that it's illegal to dispose of it yourself, like just in your bin, like it's a literal criminal offence. Why isn't that on the tin? On this one it just says dispose of contents and container to comply with local regulations. That's it. I want a big warning thing so people understand what they're buying, or maybe at the till, kind of like when you're buying alcohol and you might look like you're under 18, like having somebody come over and be like, do you know you're buying paint? Here's a leaflet about how to dispose of it when it's done. Just really obvious stuff like that. Like, why did it take me having to Google it and do a big deep dive to find out this stuff? Number 3, I think it would be cool collectively if we made decorating your homes an unusual and once in a lifetime thing. Something, even you invite your friends around to help you, because it is also like really annoying, but kind of like with weddings or like christenings, you know it's only going to happen once. So you collectively as a community come around that person and like give them resources and give them your time and like help them out. Almost like instead of like a wedding register, have like a house decorating register, because it's expensive to do and it's expensive to do sustainably, but also just making it more socially normal to decorate your houses less often, not treating decorating your house like a fast fashion project or something you change with the seasons. Even though I felt shame about not having redone our hallway in the 4 years that we've lived here, even though it was like really grubby, I'm kind of glad that we didn't, because it gave us loads of time to really think about what colour we wanted and where we wanted the white and where we didn't want. And like, you know what I mean? We've made what I think is a permanent decision about our hallway, and I don't want to redecorate it ever again, maybe in 20 years, but like decorating for the long term and thinking carefully about what you decorate and why. Not only is it better for the planet, it's also better for in here, because if you've watched that vlog, you'll know that this deteriorates as you do a decorating job. It's not for the faint-hearted, and this heart is incredibly faint. Okay, last solution. And I've been thinking about this, but I don't have any data on it because it doesn't exist. Final imagined solution from me. And I think about this a lot when it comes to like nails and stuff like that and hair. Is it more efficient, resource-wise, not money-wise, but resource-wise, to get somebody in to do the decorating? Reasons that it could be more sustainable. They're better at it, so they're going to be more efficient in their use of paint. As they're going between paint jobs, it's possible for them to reuse the paint on their next job and not have to dispose of unwanted paint, making that unwanted paint wantable again. Instead of everybody ruining one set of clothes each, they just have a designated pair of overalls that they ruin, or they're very like hardy overalls, whatever. That thing is potentially eliminated or at least reduced. They don't go into the shop and buy the wrong thing. So they're always going to be buying the thing they're genuinely going to use and they understand how to use. They're using the tools again and again and again, and it's worth them washing brushes, and they probably have brushes in loads of different colours. So they can keep using the same colour brushes for the same colours on the walls. Also, us as individuals boycotting brands doesn't have the same effect as if a decorator, somebody who goes around into a whole community and decorates everybody's houses, boycotts a brand. That would have like a real effect. And just generally, it just seems like it would make more sense, in the same way that I think I do my nails at home, but like, is it more efficient for me to go to a salon because they're actually using up their bottles of nail paint before the nail paint goes all goopy? Like stuff like that I wonder about, that I'm like, I can't find any research about that, but I would be interested to hear about it. However, we got a quote for us doing our hallway. It was our hallway, our landing and the stairs, which includes like 5 doors and door frames and a radiator, and also potentially putting scaffolding up for them to reach safely the ceiling. We didn't do scaffolding. You can watch the video to find out what we did instead. But all of that things considered, they quoted us £3,400, and that was a couple of years ago. So I imagine it's even more now. I would say it's actually a very reasonable cost. Having actually done the job, turns out very hard and time consuming. Can totally understand why they quoted so much. However, I do think that is a prohibitive amount for most people. So while I don't think they should charge less, I'm also like, if that's the most sustainable option and we can't all pay that all the time, then I'm afraid the only solution, again, is to pay people more. So we can then pay the people in our communities to do things efficiently and sustainably. I don't want to end every video saying vote green. But it feels like it's naturally gravitating that way. So that is the end of my video about everything I have been carrying around in my brain that I have found out about home decorating processes. I hope you enjoyed it, found it useful. I mean, you're here, but maybe you left me on in the background and you forgot I was here. But I hope some of you enjoyed that deep dive at least. And what I can say for me is that now that information is out of my brain and I can forget it, which is genuinely what I want to do now. This has been a very UK heavy video because that's the information that I was drawing from, but if you live in a different country, I would love to hear in the comments if your country has solved this in some way. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Has anyone cracked this problem? Can anyone crack this problem? What have I missed? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. This video would have been a little bit more dystopian and potentially a little biased if I had taken a sponsorship from one of these companies. And the reason that we weren't interrupted by a sponsor in any way, paint-wise or otherwise, is because of the Gumption Club. They tip me for my videos, they are part of my Patreon, and they make it so that I can make these videos on the internet and really minimize the amount of sponsorships I take on so that I can just make the videos that I genuinely think will be useful for you, and I don't have to factor in like what's going to get 1 trillion views or what a sponsor would like to sponsor that they will find palatable, and only tell you what they want me to tell you about their brand. As you can see, I'm a little pernickety and annoying as a person, and it means that I very rarely like brands enough to work with them. So the Gumption Club is a place that you can support me doing that, and there's lots of perks. You can hang out on our Discord, and if you like the sound of my voice, I do a podcast there as well, so there's literally like 150 episodes of my voice if you like that. I certainly don't anymore. I'm actually sick of the sound inside of myself after this long video. So sources will be below. Not sauces, sauces, no ketchup. Frog Snog out.